Killers of the Flower Moon is a Western crime drama based on the Osage murders that took place in the early 1900s. Is the 3.5-hour runtime necessary, or does the movie just drag its feet? So a little over 100 years ago, the Osage Native American tribe found oil in their land, which might as well have been gold because it brought substantial monetary value to the tribe, making them filthy rich. But unfortunately, because of jealousy and greed, several white Americans decided to commit monstrous acts to steal that wealth from these innocent people. So in this story, we follow Ernest Burkhart, played by Leonardo DiCaprio. He is a former soldier who, after returning home from his service, works a job driving around a full-blood Osage woman named Molly, played by Lily Gladstone. She has several head rights of the Osage estate, and Ernest's uncle, William Hale, played by Robert De Niro, encourages him to marry her so that her wealth can be shared with their family. William Hale is a crook with several pawns at his disposal, committing very gruesome acts for his financial gain. The power and wealth that he has makes him a very scary person, especially to his nephew Ernest, making it so that Ernest will pretty much do whatever he says. So Leonardo DiCaprio is at the top of his game in this movie. I think it was quite interesting seeing him play such a sickeningly evil character. I mean, Jordan Belfort was also a pretty evil character, but this guy is on a whole different level. So ever since the first trailer for this movie dropped earlier this year, I did hear some chatter from people saying that Leonardo DiCaprio's accent wasn't very good or his expressions were bad. I really don't agree with that at all. I really think that when you're used to seeing and hearing what somebody looks and sounds like, and then they change that for dramatic purposes, whether or not it's a person you know or an actor that you see on screen, it's really jarring. Having previously lived in North Carolina for 6 years, I was surrounded by a lot of people with very rich Southern accents. Some people's accents are thicker than others, and we see that when we compare Leo's and De Niro's in this movie. De Niro's accent wasn't quite as thick, but that doesn't really mean that one was better or worse than the other. Robert De Niro and Lily Gladstone were both really great in this movie too. I think that their performances were a lot more subtle, so I personally wouldn't nominate them for an Oscar or anything, but nevertheless, their character portrayals were really spot on. The supporting cast was mostly very well chosen too. I think that some of them, even in small roles, had very powerful presence, especially the characters who were crooks and killers. This movie at times is very unsettling. Again, this is based on the Osage murders that actually took place at the turn of the 20th century. Seeing fictional characters perish might not be triggering to a lot of people, but knowing that this was based on actual events, though dramatized of course, I thought that was extremely disturbing. Ernest and William are absolute monsters. Some of the things that they do are just completely sickening. So I could see this being a bit triggering to some viewers. That said, I thought it was really powerful and eye-opening despite being so dark. For things that I didn't like, there's thankfully not much to report in this movie. I think that the one thing worth criticizing is quite obvious: the runtime. This movie is 3.5 hours long. That is just absurd. This has to be the longest movie that I've ever sat through, in the theaters at least. Of course, Zack Snyder's Justice League was 4 hours long, but that was straight to streaming. That's a long time to sit in the theater without getting up to go to the bathroom. At least with the Snyder Cut, you could pause it or just, watch half one night and watch the other half the next night. But did the movie need to be 3.5 hours long? I think that with how much of the story that proved to be relevant to its conclusion, that it should be a longer movie. I do. That said, I think they easily could have shaved off a half hour, making it an even 3 hours, and it would have been just as good. There are a handful of scenes that ran longer than they needed to, especially ones where two-dimensional characters are just kind of ranting. I think that there's no better way to describe this movie than to say that it feels like an extended cut for a theatrical cut that got lost in the mail. There are so many short scenes in this movie, like 5 to 10 second cuts, that just didn't need to be there. Some of them felt purposeful and added value, but there are times where the movie just felt under-edited. I can spell out an example with 3 shots. So there's a shot of a young lady laying in bed with her mother. Then it cuts to a few seconds later and she is getting up and walking towards the door. Then it cuts to her walking through the door and speaking with Ernest. Most editors will agree that the middle shot just didn't need to be there. If she's in bed in one shot and then it cuts to her walking through the door and talking to Ernest, we can put 2 and 2 together and figure out that she stood up. I think that if I scrubbed through this movie in Premiere Pro, I could actually shave off 10 minutes of unneeded footage in just one go. What's funny is that Martin Scorsese responded to people addressing the long runtime by saying that people respect stage plays by braving those long run times, that people should respect cinema the same way. Besides the obvious counter-argument of long stage plays having intermissions, my response is simple: we respect cinema, Scorsese needs to respect his audience. So at this point, you might be wondering whether or not the runtime is actually worth it. I really think it is. Yes, there are times where the movie drags its feet and it arguably has too much footage, but all things considered, I thought it was incredible. There were times where it's hard to watch because of how horribly white Americans were treating indigenous people, but the suspense coupled with the intensity of some of these scenes made for such a memorable experience. I think that everyone should watch this one. Movies like this really only come once in a blue moon. Plus, Martin Scorsese is getting pretty old, and this, for all we know, could be one of the last times we get to see one of his movies in theaters. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. If it brought you any value at all, please consider giving it a thumbs up. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you later this weekend with my review of A24's Dicks the Musical.